I am 29 years old, and for 5 of those years, I was married to a man I thought I knew. My anniversary dinner was supposed to be a celebration of that. A small, quiet acknowledgement of half a decade spent building a life together. My husband, Mark, had been distant lately, but I told myself it was just stress from his job. I convinced myself that a nice dinner, a bottle of expensive wine, and the familiar comfort of my family would be the perfect remedy. I was wrong. It wasn't a remedy. It was an execution. My mother, Helen, had insisted on hosting. She said it was her treat, a gift to us for reaching this milestone. I should have known better. My mother's gifts always came with strings, usually woven into a web so intricate you wouldn't feel the pull until you were already trapped. But I agreed. I wanted to keep the peace. I wanted to believe, just for one night, that we could be a normal, happy family. The evening started with a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. Mark was quiet in the car, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I tried to make small talk, asking about his day, but his answers were clipped and vague. When we arrived at my parents' house, the tension thickened. My father gave us both a weak, watery smile and retreated to his armchair with a newspaper, a willing ghost at his own dining table. My sister Chloe was there, perched on a stool by the kitchen counter, sipping a glass of wine. She gave me a look that was a little too bright, a little too knowing. It made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. "Happy anniversary, you two," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that never reached her eyes. "Thanks, Chloe," I replied, forcing a smile. Mark just nodded, avoiding her gaze as he walked over to the drink cart to pour himself a whiskey. He drank it too fast. We sat down for dinner. The food was, as always, perfect. My mother prided herself on her cooking, on her ability to create an illusion of domestic bliss. Tonight, the illusion was paper-thin. The silence between bites was heavy, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware against porcelain. My father tried to talk about sports. Mark grunted in response. Chloe asked me about work, and I could feel her analyzing my every word, searching for a crack in my composure. Finally, my mother stood up, raising her wine glass. Her smile was sharp, a predator's smile. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced. The table fell silent. "To Sarah and Mark, 5 years. It's a wonderful achievement. It's just a shame that some things aren't built to last." A cold dread washed over me. I looked at Mark, but he was staring intently at his plate, his face pale. My mother continued, her voice gaining a cruel edge. "It's a shame when a husband has to look elsewhere for the warmth and attention he doesn't get at home." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the world had tilted on its axis. My husband was having an affair, and my mother was announcing it to the entire family at our anniversary dinner. I felt my face flush with a hot, terrible shame. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. But she wasn't finished. She turned her cold eyes on me. "And Sarah," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential, venomous tone. "Maybe if you spent a little less time worrying about your career and a little more time being a good sister, Chloe wouldn't be so terribly lonely. Maybe if you made more room in your life for your own family, your husband wouldn't have felt the need to find comfort with someone else." That was it. The final, devastating blow. She had not only exposed my husband's betrayal, but she had also blamed me for it. And somehow, in her twisted logic, it was also my fault that my perfectly capable adult sister was lonely. I looked from my mother's triumphant face to my sister's smug little smile, and then to my husband, who still couldn't meet my eyes. In that moment, something inside me broke. The part of me that had always tried to keep the peace, to smooth things over, to earn their love, shattered into a million pieces. And in its place, something new and hard and cold began to form. The silence that followed her words was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth from the room. My father was a statue, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Chloe took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, her eyes glittering over the rim of the glass. Mark finally looked up, his expression a pathetic mix of fear and guilt. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It was a stupid question. I had heard her perfectly. I just couldn't process the sheer malice behind the words. My mother placed her wineglass back on the table with a soft click. "You heard me, dear," she said, her tone falsely gentle. "I'm just saying that a marriage is a garden. You have to tend to it. You can't just expect it to flourish while you're off doing other things." "Other things?" I repeated, my voice growing stronger. "You mean my job? The job that helped us put a down payment on our house?" "Don't be dramatic, Sarah," she snapped. "We all know Mark makes plenty of money. Your little career is a hobby, a distraction. It has clearly distracted you from your real responsibilities." I felt a surge of white-hot anger. I stood up so quickly that my chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. My responsibilities? My responsibility was to trust my husband. My responsibility was to believe that my own mother wouldn't humiliate me in front of my entire family. I turned to Mark. "Is it true?" I demanded. My voice was shaking now, but I didn't care. "Are you having an affair?" He flinched, his eyes darting towards my mother as if looking for a script. "Sarah, please," he stammered. "This isn't the time or the place." "This is the perfect place," I shot back, my voice rising. "Since my mother seems to be the town crier for your indiscretions, let's hear it. Is it true?" He finally nodded, a tiny, miserable gesture. "Yes," he whispered, "but it's not what you think. It's over." "It's over?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that didn't feel like my own. "When did it become over? 5 minutes ago when my mother decided to make her grand announcement?" My mother stepped forward. "That's enough," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "You are making a scene. You are embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You just blew up my marriage and blamed me for it. And you think I'm the one causing a scene?" Chloe finally spoke, her voice laced with false concern. "Sarah, Mom is just worried. We all are. You've been so distant." "Stay out of this, Chloe," I warned, pointing a trembling finger at her. The way she said, "we all are," sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. They had been talking about this. They had been discussing my marriage, my husband's affair, my supposed failings. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. This was a planned ambush. I grabbed my purse from the floor. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Mark stood up. "Sarah, wait," he pleaded, reaching for my arm. I pulled away from him as if his touch were acid. "Don't you dare touch me," I hissed. "Don't you speak to me. Don't you follow me." I walked out of the dining room, my head held high, my back straight. I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't look back. I walked through the front door and into the cold night air, the sound of my mother's voice echoing behind me, telling everyone how hysterical and ungrateful I had always been. The carefully constructed facade of my life had been demolished, and I was left standing in the rubble. But as I walked down the driveway, the cold air filling my lungs, the shock began to recede, replaced by a chilling clarity. This wasn't just about an affair. This was a war, and I had just realized who my enemies were. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the city lights blurring through my tears. I couldn't go back to the house we shared. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene. Every object, every piece of furniture would be tainted with his betrayal. I finally pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the neon sign flickering a tired, desperate pink. I paid for a room in cash, the bills trembling in my hand. The room smelled of stale smoke and disinfectant. I locked the door, slid the chain into place, and collapsed onto the lumpy bed. The full weight of what had happened crashed down on me. My husband, the man I had promised to love and cherish, had been sleeping with another woman. My mother, the woman who was supposed to protect and support me, had used that betrayal as a weapon to publicly shame me. And my sister? My sister had watched it all with a satisfied smile. The loneliness comment kept replaying in my mind. It was so specific, so bizarre. Why would my mother connect Mark's affair to Chloe's social life? It didn't make any sense. Unless it did. A dark, insidious thought began to take root in my mind. A thought so monstrous I tried to push it away, but it clung to me like a parasite. I fumbled for my phone and dialed the only person I knew I could trust. My best friend, Sarah. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and cheerful. "Hey, how was the anniversary dinner from hell?" she asked, her tone light. I had complained to her for weeks about my mother insisting on hosting it. A sob escaped my lips, a raw, ragged sound. "Sarah?" I choked out. The cheerfulness vanished from her voice, replaced by immediate concern. "Sarah? What's wrong? What happened?" I told her everything. The toast, my mother's accusations, Mark's confession, the blame, the humiliation. I recounted every single poisonous word. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'm coming to get you," Sarah said finally, her voice firm. "Where are you?" I gave her the address of the motel. While I waited, that terrible thought circled back, more insistent this time. I thought about the little things I had ignored over the past few months. Mark working late on nights, Chloe just happened to be in the neighborhood and wanted to drop by. The inside jokes between them that I was never a part of. The way Chloe's eyes would follow Mark whenever he was in a room. When Sarah arrived, she found me sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at a water stain on the ceiling. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around me and held me while I cried. Great, heaving sobs that tore through my body. After a while, my tears subsided, leaving me feeling hollowed out and empty. I pulled away, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "He admitted it," I said, my voice hoarse. "He admitted he cheated on me." "He's a pig," Sarah said, her voice filled with a quiet fury. "And your mother is a monster. What she did, it's unforgivable." "There's more," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Her toast. She said Mark was looking for comfort elsewhere because I was being a bad sister, because Chloe was lonely." Sarah was silent for a moment, processing. Then her eyes widened in dawning horror. "Oh, Sarah," she breathed. "No, you don't think—" "I don't know what to think," I confessed. "But why would she say that? Why would she connect those two things? It's insane." "Unless they're not two separate things," Sarah finished, her voice grim. "Unless the affair and your sister are the same thing." Hearing her say it out loud, giving voice to the suspicion that had been festering in my gut, made it feel terrifyingly real. It was like a key turning in a lock, and suddenly, all the strange, disconnected pieces clicked into place. Chloe's smugness. My mother's bizarre justification. Mark's refusal to tell me who the other woman was. It wasn't just an affair. It was a family affair. A betrayal so profound, so depraved, that I could barely comprehend it. "I need to know," I said, a new resolve hardening my voice. "I need to know for sure." "Then we'll find out," Sarah said, her hand finding mine in the dim light of the motel room. "And when you do, you're going to burn them all to the ground." The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a heart full of ice. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but the shock had been replaced by a cold, clear rage. Sarah had stayed with me, sleeping in the lumpy armchair by the window. She had already gone out and returned with coffee and bagels, a small offering of normalcy in a world that had become completely unhinged. "What's the plan?" she asked, handing me a steaming cup. "I'm going back to the house," I said, my voice steady. "I need to get my things, and I need to talk to him again without my mother there to run interference." "Do you want me to come with you?" she offered. I shook my head. "No, I need to do this alone." I needed to see his face when I confronted him, to look for the tells, the flicker of lies in his eyes. The drive back to my house was surreal. The familiar streets, the manicured lawns, the cheerful mailboxes. It all looked like a set from a movie about a life that was no longer mine. When I pulled into the driveway, Mark's car was there. A part of me had hoped he would be gone, that he would have had the decency to give me space. Of course, he hadn't. I used my key to unlock the front door. The house was quiet. I found him in the living room, sitting on the sofa, staring into space. He looked like he hadn't slept. His hair was a mess and his eyes were red-rimmed. He looked pathetic. A year ago, the sight would have broken my heart. Now, it just filled me with contempt. He jumped to his feet when he saw me. "Sarah, thank God, I was so worried. I called you 100 times. I turned my phone off, I said, my voice flat. I walked past him and headed towards the bedroom. "Where were you?" he asked, following me like a lost puppy. "Does it matter?" I retorted, pulling a suitcase out of the closet. "Of course it matters. I was going out of my mind." I stopped what I was doing and turned to face him. "Were you? Or were you just worried that your little secret was out and you couldn't control the narrative anymore?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "What your mother did was horrible," he said. "I never wanted you to find out like that." "Oh, you didn't want me to find out at all," I corrected him. "Let's be honest. You just wanted to keep having your cake and eating it too." I started pulling clothes from my drawers and throwing them into the suitcase. "That's not true," he insisted. "It was a mistake. A stupid, terrible mistake. It's over. I ended it weeks ago." "Weeks ago?" I paused. "How many weeks exactly?" He hesitated. "A few, I don't know. 3, maybe 4. I resumed packing, my movements sharp and efficient. "I want to name Mark." "What?" "The woman," I said, not looking at him. "I want to know her name." "It doesn't matter," he said quickly. "She's nobody. It meant nothing." "If it meant nothing, then her name should be easy enough to say," I countered, my voice dangerously calm. "Sarah, please don't do this," he begged. "It will only make things worse." "Worse than my mother announcing my husband's infidelity at our anniversary dinner?" I asked, finally turning to look him straight in the eye. I'm having a hard time imagining what could possibly be worse than that. "So, tell me your name." He looked cornered, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. He ran a hand through his hair. "I can't." "You can't or you won't," I pressed. "I can't," he repeated, his voice pleading. "Just let it go. We can get past this. We can go to counseling. We can fix this." "There is no we anymore," I said, the words feeling final and true. "There is no this to fix." I zipped up my suitcase and hefted it off the bed. As I walked towards the door, a thought occurred to me. A simple, direct question. "Have you been talking to my mother about our marriage?" He stiffened. "She calls sometimes. To check in." "Check in about what?" "Just things. You know how she is. She worries." "Does she worry enough to give you advice?" "Did she, for instance, advise you that I've been neglecting you because of my little hobby of a career?" His silence was all the confirmation I needed. My mother hadn't just been an observer in the destruction of my marriage. She had been an active participant, feeding my husband the poison she wanted him to believe. I shook my head, a bitter smile touching my lips. "You two deserve each other," I said. I left him standing in the bedroom and walked out of the house without looking back. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror. He was standing on the porch watching me go. He looked small and defeated. Good. It was a start. Back at Sarah's apartment, I laid out my next steps. The conversation with Mark had confirmed 2 things. First, he was hiding the identity of the other woman with a desperation that went beyond typical guilt. Second, he and my mother were in communication about the intimate details of my marriage. My suspicion about Chloe was no longer just a gut feeling. It was a theory supported by evidence, but I needed more. I needed proof. I'm going to check our phone records and bank statements, I told Sarah, who was sitting across from me at her kitchen table, a laptop open and ready. Good idea, she said. If he was sloppy, there'll be a trail. I logged into our shared phone account first. It took me a few minutes to navigate the website, my fingers fumbling on the keys. I pulled up the detailed billing for the last 3 months. I scrolled through the lists of calls and texts, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Most of the numbers were familiar. His office, his parents, our friends. But then I saw it. One number listed over and over again. Hundreds of calls and texts, often late at night. Sometimes lasting for over an hour. I didn't recognize the number. I quickly typed it into a search engine, but nothing came up. It was probably a prepaid phone, a classic cheater's move. But then I cross-referenced the call times with Mark's calendar. The late-night calls corresponded perfectly with the nights he told me he was working late at the office. The longer calls during the day happened when he was supposedly on business lunches. Next, I logged into our joint bank account. I started with the credit card statements. I scrolled through the endless list of charges. Groceries, gas, our mortgage payment. It all looked depressingly normal. And then I saw them. A series of charges from a fancy, expensive restaurant across town. A place we had never been together. The charges were all from the last couple of months. Always on a weekday afternoon. They were followed by another set of charges that made my stomach clench. 3 separate payments to a boutique hotel. One of those chic, discreet places known for being a rendezvous spot. The hotel was located less than a mile from the restaurant. And as I discovered with a quick map search, it was also just 2 blocks away from the apartment complex where my sister Chloe lived. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so ugly I could barely stand to look at it. The secret phone number, the business lunches at a romantic restaurant, the hotel charges just a stone's throw from my sister's home. It was all circumstantial, but the weight of it was crushing. I needed to talk to Chloe. I knew she would lie, but I wanted to hear it. I wanted to listen to the sound of her voice, to gauge her reaction. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice syrupy sweet. Sarah, I'm so glad you called. I've been so worried about you. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. Are you sure? What Mom did was, well, it was a lot. I told her she shouldn't have interfered. Did you? I asked, a hint of steel in my tone. When did you tell her that? Before or after you all sat around discussing the details of my failing marriage? There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. That's not fair, Sarah. We were just concerned. Right. Concerned, I said. Listen, the reason I'm calling is to ask you something. Do you know who Mark was seeing? Another pause, this one longer. Of course not, she said, her voice a little too high, a little too quick. How would I possibly know something like that? I don't know, I said, letting the silence stretch. I just thought, with you two being so close lately, maybe he confided in you. We're not so close, she scoffed, but her denial was weak. He's my brother-in-law. I'm polite to him. That's all. I see, I said. Well, if you hear anything, let me know. Sure, she said, clearly anxious to get off the phone. Listen, I have to run, but call me if you need anything. Anything at all. I hung up without saying goodbye. Her denial was so transparent it was almost insulting. She knew. Of course she knew. The only question left was how deeply she was involved. Was she just a confidant? A willing audience for my husband's and mother's complaints? Or was she the star of the show? I looked at the evidence laid out before me. The phone logs, the bank statements, the map showing the proximity of the hotel to her apartment. My gut, my instincts, and the evidence were all screaming the same thing. The unnamed woman, the object of my husband's affection, the cause of my sister's supposed loneliness, were all one and the same person. My sister was sleeping with my husband, and my mother knew. She hadn't just known. She had condoned it. She had used it as a weapon against me. The rage I felt was so pure, so absolute it was almost calming. The time for tears was over. The time for doubt was over. Now it was time for a reckoning. They had conspired to humiliate me, to break me. They had underestimated me. They thought I would crumble, that I would accept the blame they so eagerly placed upon me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had created a monster, and I was about to show them just how monstrous I could be. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. The affair was just a symptom of a much deeper sickness in my family. It was a sickness of jealousy, of favoritism, of a deep-seated resentment my mother and sister had always harbored towards me. I was the one who had gotten out, the one who had built a life for herself, the one who had a successful career and a handsome husband. They had seen it not as my success, but as their failure, and they had decided to tear it all down. As I sat there in Sarah's quiet apartment, a new thought began to form, a chilling question that went beyond the immediate betrayal. Why now? Why would my mother choose my 5th anniversary to detonate this bomb? The affair, according to Mark, had been going on for months. They could have done this at any time. The public nature of the reveal, the calculated cruelty of it, felt like it had a purpose beyond simple malice. It felt strategic. And then it hit me. An inheritance. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had passed away 2 years ago. She had been a shrewd, intelligent woman who had seen my mother's manipulative nature for what it was. In her will, she had left the bulk of her considerable estate to me, in the form of a trust fund. The terms were specific. I was to gain full control of the trust on my 30th birthday. My 30th birthday was in 4 months. I remembered a conversation with my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Davison, when the will was being read. He had walked me through the legal jargon, but one clause had stuck in my mind. It was a morality clause, something he said was old-fashioned, but my grandmother had insisted upon. The clause stated that if I were to be divorced due to proven moral turpitude on my part before my 30th birthday, a significant portion of the trust would be forfeited and would pass to the next of kin. My next of kin was Chloe. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about hurting me. This was about money. They weren't trying to break up my marriage. They were trying to provoke me. They wanted to push me so far that I would do something rash, something they could use against me. Maybe they hoped I would get angry and have an affair of my own in retaliation. Maybe they thought they could drive me to a public breakdown, something they could paint as instability. They wanted to detonate my life so they could sift through the ashes and claim their prize. The public humiliation at the dinner was their opening salvo, a calculated move designed to make me emotional, irrational, and predictable. They're after my inheritance, I said out loud, the words tasting like poison. Sarah looked up from her laptop. What are you talking about? I explained the trust fund, the morality clause, the timing. As I spoke, the pieces of the puzzle rearranged themselves into a new, even more sinister picture. My mother's constant criticism of my career wasn't just about her outdated values. It was about painting me as a selfish, neglectful wife. Her bizarre focus on Chloe's loneliness wasn't just a clumsy attempt at emotional manipulation. It was a way to create a narrative, to justify the affair, to position Chloe as a sympathetic figure who was simply seeking the comfort her cold-hearted sister denied everyone. It's a setup, Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. They're trying to frame you. They're not just trying, I said, my voice hard as flint. They have a plan, and they think I'm too stupid and too emotional to see it. A new kind of resolve settled over me. This was no longer just about getting revenge for a broken heart. This was about protecting myself, about honoring my grandmother's memory, about making sure these vipers didn't get a single cent of what was rightfully mine. I couldn't fight them with emotion. I had to fight them with strategy. I had to be colder, more calculating, and more ruthless than they ever imagined I could be. I need a private investigator, I said. Sarah nodded slowly. You do. You need undeniable proof, photos, recordings, something they can't possibly deny or twist. And in the meantime, I continued, a plan beginning to form in my mind. I'm going to play their game. What do you mean? She asked. They expect me to be a wreck, I explained. They expect me to be hysterical, to lash out to make mistakes. So I'm going to give them the opposite. I'm going to be the broken, forgiving wife. I'm going to tell Mark I want to work things out. I'm going to tell him I want to go to therapy. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Are you serious? You can't be. I am, I insisted. It's the only way. I need to get him to lower his guard. I need him to believe he's gotten away with it. I need him and my sister to get careless. And while they're basking in their supposed victory, the investigator will be gathering everything I need to destroy them. It was a dangerous game. It would require me to swallow my pride, to choke back my anger, to pretend to be someone I was not. It would mean looking my husband in the eye and faking forgiveness while my heart screamed with betrayal. It would mean speaking to my mother and sister with a veneer of civility that felt like a betrayal of myself. But it was the only way. They had chosen the weapons for this war: deception and manipulation. And I was about to show them that I was a much better soldier than they were. The first step was the hardest. I had to call Mark. I let the phone ring 4 times before I picked up, just to make him sweat. Sarah? He answered, his voice tentative. I've been thinking, I said, forcing my voice to sound small and tired. And I don't want to throw 5 years away without trying. There was a palpable sense of relief in his sigh. Oh, Sarah, I'm so glad to hear you say that. I love you so much. I'll do anything to fix this. I want to go to counseling, I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. Both of us. Together. Of course. He agreed immediately. Anything you want. I'll book the appointment today. And Mark? I added, my voice trembling slightly for effect. I forgive you. He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he processed his unbelievable luck. The fool actually believed it. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You won't regret this, I promise. Oh, I knew he would regret it. He just had no idea how much. The next day, I found a private investigator. His name was Mr. Harris, a former cop with tired eyes and an office that smelled of stale coffee and cynicism. I told him the whole story, leaving out no detail. He listened patiently, his face impassive, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I was finished, he looked at me for a long moment. This is a nasty piece of business, ma'am, he said, his voice a low gravel. Family cases are always the worst. I don't need a friend, I told him, my voice firm. I need proof. I need you to follow my husband, Mark, and my sister Chloe. I need pictures. I need to know every time they meet, where they go, what they do. I need irrefutable evidence of their affair. He nodded. I can do that. It will be expensive. Money is no object, I said. It was the first time I had ever said those words, and they felt powerful. My grandmother's money, the very thing they were trying to steal, was now the weapon I would use to defeat them. I wrote him a check for a substantial retainer. I'll be in touch, he said, tucking the check into his desk drawer. As I left his office, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had set the pieces in motion. The trap was being laid. Now, all I had to do was play my part and wait. Playing the role of the wounded, forgiving wife was more draining than I could have ever imagined. Our first therapy session was a masterclass in manipulation, with Mark as the star pupil. He cried. He spoke of his deep shame, his terrible mistake. He talked about the pressure at work, about feeling disconnected from me. He spun a beautiful, tragic story of a good man who had lost his way. The therapist, a kind-faced woman with sympathetic eyes, seemed to be buying it. I played my part too. I spoke of my hurt, my shock, but also of my deep love for my husband and my commitment to our marriage. I cried on cue. By the end of the session, the therapist was telling us what a strong foundation we had to build on. I wanted to laugh. Our foundation was a sinkhole, and I was just waiting for the right moment to push him in. Life at home became a surreal performance. Mark was overly attentive, constantly touching me, telling me he loved me. It took every ounce of my self-control not to flinch away from him. He brought me flowers. He cooked me dinner. He acted like a man who had been given a second chance and was determined not to waste it. The entire time, I knew he was still lying. He had never admitted the other woman was Chloe. He was still protecting her, still a part of their conspiracy. His attentiveness wasn't about love. It was about managing his risk, ensuring his golden goose didn't fly away before the trust fund paid out. My mother, of course, was ecstatic. She called me every day, her voice dripping with triumphant satisfaction. "I'm so proud of you, Sarah," she'd say. "You're finally learning that marriage is about compromise and forgiveness. You're being the bigger person." I would murmur my agreement, my stomach churning. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully browbeaten me into submission. She had no idea that her every word was just adding more fuel to the fire of my rage. One afternoon, she took her audacity to a whole new level. "You know," she said casually, "I was thinking, Chloe is still feeling so down about everything, and she's so worried about you. Maybe it would be a good idea if she moved in with you and Mark for a little while, to help out. You know, to give you both some support." I almost dropped the phone. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me breathless. She wanted to install her spy, the adulteress, in my own home. She wanted Chloe there to monitor me, to ensure the plan stayed on track, to further cement her position in my life and my marriage. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "Oh, Mom," I said, injecting a note of weary fragility into my voice. "That's so thoughtful of you, but I just don't think we're ready for that. Things are still so raw. Having anyone else in the house right now? I think it would be too much pressure on Mark and me as we try to heal." There was a beat of silence on her end, and I could feel her displeasure radiating through the phone. I had deviated from the script. I was supposed to be a pliable doormat, grateful for her help. "Well, if you say so," she said, her voice turning chilly. "But I think you're making a mistake. Families should stick together in times of crisis." "I know," I said softly, "and I appreciate the offer so much. Maybe in a few weeks." I had to give her some hope to cling to keep her from getting suspicious. After I hung up, I had to sit down. My hands were shaking. They were more brazen than I had ever imagined. They weren't just trying to manipulate me from a distance. They wanted to be inside my life, inside my home, twisting the knife every single day. The thought of Chloe living in my house, sleeping down the hall, eating at my table made me feel physically ill. My resolve hardened. I was not going to let them win. I was not going to break. I was going to wait, and I was going to bide my time. And when the moment was right, I was going to bring their entire corrupt world crashing down around them. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day felt like a year. I went to work. I went to therapy. I came home and played the part of a wife trying to piece her marriage back together. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I let Mark hold my hand when I wanted to rip it away. I listened to my mother's condescending advice when I wanted to tell her exactly what I thought of her. I was an actress in a terrible play, and I was counting the minutes until the final act. Mr. Harris, the investigator, checked in every few days with brief professional updates. Subject A, Mark, and Subject B, Chloe, met for lunch today at the Red Heron. They were there for 2 hours. Or, Subject A visited Subject B's apartment building this evening. He stayed for 3 hours and 17 minutes. Each update was a small, sharp stab of confirmation. They were still seeing each other. The affair wasn't over, as Mark had claimed. He was just being more careful. My forgiveness had made him arrogant, and arrogance was making him sloppy. The therapy sessions continued their farcical trajectory. Mark was a fountain of remorse. I was a model of grace and understanding. In our third session, I decided to test the waters. I think, I said, looking at the therapist but speaking to Mark, that for me to truly move on, I need complete honesty. I need to know who she was. Mark's face immediately tensed. Sarah, we talked about this. Her name doesn't matter. It will only cause more pain. It's causing me pain not knowing, I countered, my voice soft and pleading. My mind just fills in the blanks. I imagine it's someone I know, a friend, a coworker. It's torture. The therapist chimed in, her brow furrowed with concern. Mark, Sarah has a point. Secrets are like a poison in a relationship. If this is truly over, then complete transparency might be a necessary step towards rebuilding trust. He looked trapped. I could see the panic in his eyes. He was sweating. I can't, he finally said, his voice strained. Please don't ask me to do that. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. I don't understand, I whispered. If you love me, if you want to fix this, why are you still protecting her? It was a perfect performance. I was the wounded victim, and he was the cruel, withholding husband. The therapist's gaze on him became cooler, more critical. He had lost her sympathy. The session ended on a tense note with no resolution. But I had achieved my goal. I had planted a seed of doubt in the therapist's mind, and I had confirmed, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the secret of the other woman's identity was one he would protect at all costs, which meant the stakes were higher than a simple, meaningless fling. A few days later, I staged a reconciliation lunch with my mother and Chloe. It was my idea. I told them I wanted to clear the air, to thank my mother for her tough love, which had forced me to confront the problems in my marriage. They were smugly triumphant. They chose the restaurant, a trendy, overpriced place where they could be seen. I played my role to perfection. I was meek, apologetic, and grateful. You were right, Mom, I said, looking down at my salad. I was letting my career get in the way. I wasn't being a good partner to Mark. Or a good sister to you, Chloe. Chloe reached across the table and patted my hand. It's okay, Sarah, she said, her voice oozing fake sympathy. We all make mistakes. The important thing is that you see it now. My mother beamed. I'm just so glad you've come to your senses, she said. A family is the most important thing a woman can have, not some silly job title. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming. I endured an hour of their condescending advice and self-satisfied pronouncements. They thought they had me completely under their control. They thought I was broken. As I sat there, nodding and smiling, I felt a kind of out-of-body detachment. I was watching a scene unfold, and the woman who looked like me was a stranger. My real self was miles away, cold and patient, counting down the days. The breakthrough came a week later. It was a Tuesday evening. I was at Sarah's apartment, having given Mark a flimsy excuse about a work dinner. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Mr. Harris. The subject line was just one word: proof. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked open the email. There were several attachments. The first was a folder of photographs. I opened it. The first few photos were of Mark and Chloe meeting at a cafe, sitting close together at a small table. Then, there were photos of them walking in a park, holding hands. My breath hitched. The next photo was of them standing outside the boutique hotel near Chloe's apartment. Mark was looking around, his expression furtive. Chloe was smiling up at him. And then, the final, undeniable shot. They were kissing. A full, passionate kiss right on the street before slipping into the hotel lobby. I felt a wave of nausea, but also a surge of vindication. Here it was. The visual proof. The thing no one could deny. But there was more. The second attachment was an audio file. Mr. Harris had included a brief note in the email. Subjects met in a public park this afternoon. I was able to place a recording device on a nearby bench. The quality is quite good. With a trembling hand, I clicked play. The sound of birds and distant traffic filled the speakers, and then I heard my sister's voice, sharp and impatient. I'm just tired of waiting, Mark. How much longer is this going to take? Then Mark's voice, low and placating. Just a little longer, babe, I promise. We have to handle the trust fund situation carefully. Once Sarah is out of the picture and the money is sorted, we'll have everything we've ever wanted. We can go public. We can be together. My blood turned to ice. He had said it. He had said my name. He had explicitly linked their relationship to my grandmother's trust. Then Chloe spoke again, and her words were the final nail in their coffin. Your mother-in-law is a genius, she said, a laugh in her voice. Getting her to blow it all up at your anniversary dinner was a perfect move. Sarah is so predictable. She'll fall apart, lash out, and we'll have all the ammunition we need to paint her as the unstable one. She'll play right into our hands. I stopped the recording. I couldn't listen to any more. I sat there in stunned silence, the voices of my husband and my sister echoing in my head. It was all there. The affair, the conspiracy, the plan to steal my inheritance, the calculated cruelty of the anniversary dinner. My mother wasn't just an accomplice. She was the architect of my public humiliation. She was a genius. I looked at Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing with fury. I'm going to kill them, she whispered. No, I said, my voice eerily calm. Killing is too quick. I'm going to do something much worse. I'm going to expose them. I saved the files. I made multiple copies, uploading them to a secure cloud server, saving them on a thumb drive, and emailing them to Sarah for safekeeping. This was my leverage. This was my weapon. This was my justice. My 30th birthday was in 3 weeks. According to the terms of the trust, a final meeting was required with the estate lawyer, Mr. Davison, to sign the paperwork that would officially transfer the assets to my name. The meeting required the presence of the primary beneficiary, me, and the contingent beneficiaries, my mother and Chloe. Mark, as my husband, was also expected to be there. It was the perfect stage, a private, formal setting, a legal proceeding. There would be no escape. No room for them to twist the narrative or accuse me of being hysterical. There would only be the cold, hard, undeniable truth. For the next 3 weeks, I was the model of serenity. I was kinder to Mark than I had ever been. I agreed with everything my mother said. I even went shopping with Chloe, enduring her endless chatter about her plans for the future, a future she clearly imagined would be financed by my inheritance. They were swimming in their victory, completely oblivious to the shark circling beneath them. The night before the meeting, Mark tried to be intimate with me. He put his arms around me, his touch making my skin crawl. I'm so happy, he murmured into my hair. I feel like we're finally getting our life back. I gently pushed him away. I'm happy too, I said, my voice soft. But let's wait. Let's wait until after the meeting tomorrow. After all this financial stuff is settled, I want to start our new chapter with a completely clean slate. He bought it. Of course. He saw it as a romantic gesture, a symbolic new beginning. He had no idea it was a final rejection. He had no idea that our new chapter was a book he would have no part in writing. I slept on the couch that night, my mind clear and my purpose absolute. The dawn was coming, and with it, the reckoning. The morning of my 30th birthday dawned gray and overcast, a perfect reflection of the storm I was about to unleash. I chose my outfit with care. A sharp, dark gray suit. It was armor. It was professional, serious, and utterly devoid of the soft, accommodating woman they all thought I was. Mark was practically giddy. He kept talking about a vacation we should take to celebrate, somewhere warm and tropical. A real second honeymoon, he said, squeezing my shoulder. I just smiled and nodded, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of anticipation. We drove to the lawyer's office together. My parents and Chloe were already there, waiting in the plush wood-paneled conference room. My mother was dressed in a vibrant, triumphant shade of blue. Chloe looked radiant, her smile wide and genuine for the first time in years. My father, as usual, looked vaguely uncomfortable. a background character in his own family's drama. Mr. Davison, a kind elderly man with a neat white mustache, greeted us all warmly. "Happy birthday, Sarah," he said, shaking my hand. "A momentous day." "Thank you, Mr. Davison," I replied, my voice even. "It certainly is." We all took our seats around the large mahogany table. Mark sat beside me, his hand resting possessively on my chair. My mother, father, and Chloe sat opposite us. The air was thick with expectation. Theirs was a greedy, triumphant expectation. Mine was the quiet, patient expectation of a hunter about to spring a trap. Mr. Davison laid out a thick stack of documents in front of me. "Now," he began, "this is mostly a formality. Your grandmother's instructions were very clear. Upon your 30th birthday, full control of the Marion Albright Trust is to be transferred to you, Sarah. We just need you to sign here and here." He pointed to several signature lines. I looked at the documents, at the dense legal text that represented my future, my freedom. I picked up the pen. I could feel the eager eyes of my family on me. They were inches from their prize. I held the pen over the paper, and then I put it down. I folded my hands on the table and looked up, my gaze sweeping across their expectant faces. "Before I sign," I said, my voice clear and strong, cutting through the quiet room, "I have something I'd like to share with everyone. A little anniversary gift that I forgot to play for my husband." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small, sleek digital audio recorder. I placed it in the center of the table. A flicker of confusion crossed their faces. Mark looked at me, a quizzical smile on his lips. "Sarah, what is this?" "Just a recording," I said calmly. "I think you'll all find it very illuminating." I pressed the play button. The sound of birdsong filled the silent room, and then Chloe's voice, sharp and clear. "I'm just tired of waiting, Mark. How much longer is this going to take?" The transformation around the table was instantaneous. Chloe's face went slack with shock. My mother's smile froze and then crumbled. Mark's face drained of all color, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide with confusion. Then came Mark's voice, the voice of my husband, conspiring to ruin me. "Just a little longer, babe. I promise. We have to handle the trust fund situation carefully. Once Sarah is out of the picture and the money is sorted, we'll have everything we've ever wanted." My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. She looked at Chloe, then at Mark, her eyes darting back and forth in panic. And then, the final damning lines from Chloe. "Your mother-in-law is a genius. Getting her to blow it all up at your anniversary dinner was a perfect move. Sarah is so predictable. She'll fall apart." I let the recording play for a few more seconds before pressing stop. The silence that descended on the room was absolute, profound. It was the silence of guilt, of exposure, of utter and complete ruin. Mr. Davison was staring at the recorder, his face a mask of grim disbelief. My father was looking at my mother, his expression one of dawning horror, as if seeing her for the first time. I broke the silence. I reached back into my briefcase and pulled out a glossy 8x10 photograph. I slid it across the polished surface of the table. It stopped directly in front of Mark. It was the photo of him and Chloe, locked in a passionate kiss outside the hotel. I slid another photo across, this one of them holding hands in the park. Then another of them entering the hotel lobby. I leaned back in my chair, my composure absolute. I looked at Mark. "I believe this constitutes adultery," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "And the recording seems to outline a clear conspiracy to commit fraud regarding this very trust. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Davison?" The lawyer cleared his throat, his professional demeanor snapping back into place. He looked at my mother, Mark, and Chloe, his eyes filled with contempt. "The evidence you've presented is highly disturbing," he said, his voice grave. "And yes, it could certainly have very serious legal ramifications, including civil and potentially criminal charges." That's when the dam broke. "How could you?" My mother shrieked, her voice cracking. She wasn't looking at Mark or Chloe. She was looking at me. How could you do this to your own family? You ungrateful little witch. Chloe burst into tears, great, gulping sobs of self-pity. You've ruined my life, she wailed, burying her face in her hands. I have nothing. You've ruined everything. Mark turned to me, his eyes wide with desperation. Sarah, please, he begged, his voice a pathetic whisper. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. We can still fix this. I'll do anything. I'll leave her. I'll never speak to them again. Please don't do this. I looked at the three of them, their faces contorted with shock and rage and fear. The people who were supposed to love me the most. The people who had plotted my downfall with smiles on their faces. And I felt nothing. Not sadness, not pity. Just a vast, empty sense of finality. I turned my attention back to Mr. Davison, ignoring their pathetic implosion. Mr. Davison, I said, my voice cutting through their noise. I will be filing for divorce from my husband on the grounds of adultery. I will be seeking a settlement in which he receives absolutely nothing from our shared assets, given his fraudulent conduct. I then turned my gaze to my mother and sister. As for the two of you, I will not be pressing charges for conspiracy to commit fraud, on one condition. You will sign a legally binding document, right here, right now, relinquishing any and all future claims to this trust, or any part of my estate, forever. You will walk out of this office and out of my life, and I will never see or hear from you again. If you refuse, or if you ever try to contact me again, I will hand this recording and these photos over to the district attorney. Is that clear? My mother stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Chloe's sobs hitched. They were trapped. Checkmate. Mr. Davison, looking grimly satisfied, began to draft the necessary documents. The room was filled with the sound of Chloe's weeping and the furious, impotent silence of my mother. Mark just sat there, broken, staring at the photo of him kissing my sister, a monument to his own stupidity. I finally picked up the pen. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed the papers that gave me control of my inheritance, my future, and my freedom. I had won. The aftermath was swift and brutal, exactly as I had intended. The divorce proceedings were a formality. Mark, faced with the undeniable evidence of adultery and his role in the conspiracy, didn't dare fight me on a single point. His lawyer advised him to sign whatever I put in front of him. He walked away with his personal belongings and nothing else. The house was mine. Our savings were mine. His reputation, however, was in tatters. News travels fast in a small town. The story of what happened at the lawyer's office, while not public knowledge in its entirety, leaked out in whispers and rumors. People knew there had been a spectacular implosion. They knew Mark had cheated with my sister, and that my mother had somehow been involved. Mark's company, a conservative firm that prized its public image, had a strict morality clause in its employment contracts. He was quietly fired 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized. The last I heard, he was working a retail job in a neighboring town, living in a cheap apartment, a ghost of the confident, successful man he once was. My mother and sister, true to their word, signed the documents Mr. Davison prepared. They relinquished all claims to my inheritance and agreed to a permanent no-contact order. They walked out of that office and, for a time, out of my life. But their punishment was not just financial or legal. It was social. My mother, who had always prided herself on being a pillar of the community, a respected matriarch, became a pariah. Her friends stopped calling. She was uninvited from her various social clubs and charity boards. Her genius plan had cost her the one thing she valued more than money: her status. Chloe's fate was, in many ways, even more pathetic. Her loneliness became a cruel town joke. Her reputation was annihilated. She couldn't find a respectable man who would look at her twice. She was branded a homewrecker, a scheming sister, a failure. Without the prospect of my inheritance to make her attractive, she was left with nothing but her own bitter personality. From what I heard, she and my mother were still living together, trapped in my childhood home, a prison of their own making, their days filled with recriminations and blame, each a constant, toxic reminder of the other's failure. The one surprise in all of this was my father. About a month after the meeting, he called me. His voice was hesitant, filled with a shame I had never heard from him before. "Sarah," he said, I'm so sorry." "For what, Dad?" I asked, my voice neutral. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was willing to listen. "For everything," he said, his voice cracking. "For not seeing it. For not standing up to your mother. For being a coward. I sat there for years and watched her favor Chloe, watched her undermine you, and I never said a word. I was weak. And I let her and your sister and that man. I let them do this to you. I am so, so sorry." It was the most honest, most vulnerable I had ever heard him be. It didn't erase the years of passive neglect, but it was a start. "I've left her, Sarah," he continued, his voice quiet. "I've moved out. I can't live in that house anymore. I can't look at her." We talked for a long time that day. It was the first real conversation we'd had in my entire adult life. Our relationship is still a work in progress. It's tentative, fragile, built on the rubble of our old family. But it's real. He is trying in his own quiet way to atone. As for me, I took the freedom my grandmother's trust afforded me and I ran with it. I sold the house, that monument to a life built on lies. I had no interest in living with Mark's ghosts. I packed up my belongings, quit my job, and moved to a city on the coast, a place where no one knew my name or my story. The money didn't buy happiness, but it bought me peace. It bought me security. It bought me the time and space to heal. I started my own consulting business, on my own terms. I bought a small house with a view of the ocean. I made new friends. I slowly, carefully, began to build a new life, one that was entirely my own, free from the poison of my family. One evening, about a year after I had left, a letter arrived. It had been forwarded from my old address. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's. My first instinct was to burn it, unopened. But curiosity got the better of me. I sat on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I read it. It was not an apology. It was a tirade. A long, rambling letter filled with self-pity, blame, and venom. She wrote about how I had destroyed the family, how I had been selfish and cruel, how I had ruined Chloe's life and embarrassed my father. She painted herself as the victim, the loving mother whose only crime was caring too much. There was not a single word of remorse, not a flicker of self-awareness. I read the letter, and I felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. She was never going to change. She and Chloe would spend the rest of their lives marinating in their own bitterness, convinced of their own victimhood. They would never understand what they had done wrong. They would never learn the lesson. I folded the letter neatly, walked back into my house, and tossed it into the fireplace. I watched the paper curl, turn black, and crumble into ash. They never learned a thing about remorse or accountability, but they had learned what it felt like to lose. They had learned what it felt like to be powerless, to be exposed, to have their futures snatched away from them. And as I watched the last embers of my mother's letter fade into nothing, I realized that was enough. It was more than enough.